So first of all, welcome to everyone. So I don't know all your names. I was going to do it individually, but it might take a little while. But welcome. Thanks for coming down on this cold, wet, windy Cape Town winter day, although yesterday was summer. So this is the second debate like this. It's our first year as a society, so we're just really excited to start setting ourselves up. The first one we covered alcohol advertising, whether it should actually be banned, and Andrew, who's not here at the moment, and I were batting around a couple different topic ideas, and I think at the time Edward Snowden was exploding and people were trying to chase him in planes, and so in the news everyone was having an absolute go at Mr. Obama for stealing their information, and I thought, he's actually hopefully trying to do something good with it, although that's another debate completely. But what about marketers? Because they're getting the information from Google and Microsoft and Yahoo and everyone, that they're using your information as well to target you and stuff. So we thought it might be an interesting debate to start looking at what marketers' role in that whole conversation is. So that's why the topic came about. So just the panelists. Here next to me is Don Ross, who's, as you know, is the Dean of Commerce and a few other things. He's also known as the guy on campus with that really cool yellow suit, the American lecturer, even though he's not American. So there's a couple facts. So thanks very much for joining us. We have Dave Duarte, who I've known a little while. He's a really cool guy, number one. But also,
thanks. We can leave it at that.
Yeah, we can. But been involved with UCT and education for a while, and digital businesses. He's a sort of like a little serial entrepreneur, and he's on the board of a couple, and he's got a couple himself. So nice to have Dave here. And when he asked me which side of the debate do I want him to sit on, I didn't say anything. I said, "What do you want?" And he's like, "I feel strongly about this side." So you can tell he's got a lot of emotion behind what he's going to say.
That's true. Then
we've got Noah, who's from the Debating Society, who's going to chair the meeting. So thanks very much to Noah. You might remember him from the first event. Thanks for being here. Then next to Noah is Casper. Casper is a master's student from Switzerland that I know, and we're having a conversation at Forry's over a non-alcoholic beverage. And
why?
That may have been a lie, disclaimer. And Casper sort of had some strong views about this sort of topic, so when it came up that we needed speakers, I went to Casper, so hopefully he has something to add, no pressure. And then next to him is David, who's from the Debating Society, and he says he's trying to knock some socks off here, so hopefully so hopefully he will. I'm going to hand it over to Noah, who's going to get us started. I look forward to it.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
How's everyone? I assume you all know the motion by now, but if you don't, I'm just going to reiterate it. It's that marketing technologies are really better, or are they really better for the consumer market? So just so you know, just so we're all on the sort of equal playing field before we get off, by marketing technologies, we're looking at things like social media marketing, search engine marketing, email marketing, basically looking at all forms of online advertising, and where they use, for example, complex algorithms in order to deliver you personalized and tailored advertising to cater for individual needs. So really, I think in today's debate, there's going to be a way up from the proposition team is sitting on my left here, looking at how it's better for businesses. Smaller businesses are able to access advertising more easily and deliver less clutter to consumers, whether you can target their direct needs, versus probably a more moral stance coming out from the opposition team today with concerns about promoting, for example, consumerism and privacy within society. How it's going to work, we're going to give each of these speakers 5 minutes to speak. We're going to go proposition, opposition, proposition, opposition. After that, I'm going to be asked each one of the speakers a question, and I'll allow them to also correspondingly direct questions to the opposition team. And from that stage onwards, we're going to open up to the floor. You guys can ask questions to these speakers for about 15 minutes or so, or around there, depending on how much time we have, and then we'll allow them to conclude afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon the first speaker of the proposition. Dave, take it away.
Thanks very much. Okay, good evening, everyone. So, can I just see by a show of hands who here likes most online marketing? Little ads you see, lose 6 pounds of belly fat. No. All right. No, I was just checking. That's because most of it is crap. And if you think that marketers are personalizing their online advertising to you, unfortunately, you're wrong. It's one of the biggest battles that I find as an online educator these days, trying to get marketers to personalize their marketing. So, when it comes to how we use the internet, we know that kind of one of the biggest things that you can do to punish someone is turn off their cookies. Cookies are little things that track your behavior online, and the more your cookies sit on your computer, the more personalized your experience of the web is. It caches or keeps certain pages that you visited stored on your computer, it remembers your passwords, and it tracks your experience across the web, including showing you ads that are increasingly more relevant based on the websites that you go to, as long as they're part of Google's double-click for publishers network. If you take that off, if you close that, suddenly people are logged off everything. So every time you go to Facebook, by the way, who here looked at their smartphone when they were in bed this morning? Yo, did anyone not? All right, so who here has checked Facebook today? Jeez, okay, excellent. Yeah. Who here has been to a news site like the Mail and Guardian today? Less, far less. All right, cool. Facebook has personalized content. All right, mainstream content, broad content like Mail and Guardian, etc. is brilliant, but it's not personalized. We're addicted to Facebook because it's absolutely personalized. But back to the cookie story. If they're removed, imagine you had to log into Facebook again every time you went there. It didn't remember you. All right, and every time you had to go there, you log in. I bet you wouldn't visit it as much. Imagine every time you went there, never learned about your interest and your taste, so you saw that. Damn, stop smoking or lose weight. And it's like, what are they trying to tell me? And in most cases, they're not trying to tell you anything. They just haven't really targeted it. Who here reads books on Kindle? Ebooks, fantastic. Who here has bought a book on Amazon before? Okay, excellent. Has anyone used those recommendations on Amazon before? Like, if you've enjoyed this, you might have also enjoyed that. Anyone? I find those really interesting, right? If Amazon didn't have that, I would personally have a far less rich literary life aside of myself, because there's so many amazing books that I wouldn't discover. Okay, so, I've gone on and basically, most of the advertising we see is a waste of time online because it really isn't targeted to us. It just shows that there's a lot of marketers that lack the sophistication to give us the kind of marketing messaging that we really value at the time and place that we really value it. Companies that do it, we appreciate them and we thank them for it. Google is valued at over 3 trillion rand. That was their valuation last year, because they're able to personalize and target marketing for us in a way that it doesn't seem like marketing, but rather looks like useful information where and when we need it. We're oftentimes clicking on ads in Google without realizing it. Only 13% of Google's homepage is actually organic or unsponsored links. The rest is all sponsored. So chances are you've clicked on Google ads and paid a bit of commission. So lastly, just to kind of hopefully preempt what the other team is going to say about the moral, the ethical issues, I value my time and attention. It's all that I have. As someone that started a small business with no capital and has needed to go out there and kind of pitch my wares and kind of learn as I go along, every minute of my day is absolutely valuable. What I think is unethical is when marketers spam me with spray and pray emails. That hope, that I'm interested in their latest financial service offering, whether or not I've got 5 other insurance products that fill the same needs. I don't want email. I want me-mail. The only mails that I open from marketers are things like Discovery Health. They tell me how I drive, how my health has been going. And on the back of that, they say, we know that you shop a lot at Pick and Pay. We know that you like, these kinds of products. Here's a coupon for this. That's a coupon that I'll use versus a random coupon for a product that I might never use, like laser hair removal products or something like that. So, yeah. All right. So basically, just in summary, I think that it's unethical not to target advertising because I think that it wastes people's time unless we have the consideration to get to know them better.
Cool. We thank Dave for his speech, and I'll call upon David to reply.
I like to think of the internet as a place where you can be exposed to new ideas. That's something that companies like Google and Facebook have now decided to rob us of. And this is what these targeted ads do, right? What they do is they use backward-looking considerations based on information that they already have about you in order to decide what your preferences are for you. That's something that I think is problematic. The main reason, and I agree, yes, it does help you to be able to find products that suit interests that you've already put out there online. But what it does not do is it doesn't expose you to new products that you otherwise would have never seen. And that's a specific value that I think the internet has that we're gradually losing. It's very important for different groups of people, and yes, it might take a bit more time to be exposed to a range of ideas. So I might get targeted based on my income bracket because I've acknowledged how much I earn in a given month on a particular website, and that limits the scope of things that the internet will expose to me. That's incredibly dangerous because it means there are a whole lot of preferences out there that I could have had, but now won't, because companies like Google and the algorithms they use have decided for me that those things are things that I should not want. And also they engage in practices like profiling. So if you're a woman, if you're in a low income bracket, if you're African American, these are cases in which these searches specifically target you. So they create and they foster the process of othering, whereby different groups of people are exposed to different products. Because the truth is, what's marketed to us does determine who we are to an extent. The products we consume, the products we're exposed to, are an important part of the identity that we form. It's incredibly important, therefore, that companies don't put people in little boxes and say these are the types of products that should form your identity. It's a lot more valuable where the internet's an open place in which people can be exposed to a range of different ideas that aren't necessarily things that they in the short term want. They might be things that people need, they might be things that you ought to be exposed to, that won't necessarily create the most revenue for companies. Secondly, and the reason why I think it's more important that you're exposed to a variety of things as opposed to these companies simply helping you realize your pre-existing preferences, is because you know what your pre-existing preferences are. You can go out and search products that supply those sorts of things that you already know you want. It's much more important for you to be exposed to different ideas because that's something that you wouldn't do on your own. It's those black swan events where you see something new that you didn't know you wanted and are inspired that really matter the most when it comes to online marketing. Secondly, there's a concern with privacy and the extent to which people consent to this practice. So in cases where people have been surveyed about the extent of information that companies like Google and Facebook have about them, people in a large majority of cases say that they don't like the fact that these companies know quite so much about them. There's a large problem of awareness with the average consumer not knowing the extent to which these companies have access to their very basic information and access to information about their lives, which in many cases those companies choose to sell on in order to make a greater profit. The fact that people don't know this and the fact that they largely are users of the internet without really understanding it creates a moral hazard and creates a moral problem whereby people are effectively coerced into something that they don't realize is something they would not otherwise consent to. So because it undermines your access to new ideas and new products that you wouldn't have otherwise wanted, and because there's a privacy concern, I think we definitely should regret the effect that these targeted adverts have on consumers.
Right, we thank David for his speech, and I'll call upon Don to reply.
Thank you. Thank you. So the question that was put to the panel was a little bit more specific, had a little more content than just, is targeted advertising good or bad? I mean, I take it that's not a very interesting question, right? Is it? I mean, not a very meaningful question. For anything that's out there, it's going to be good for some people and bad for others, depending on what their preferences are. So, but the question had a little more content than that. It specifically asked us to address whether a particular aspect of its possible badness, right? And the aspect was this, right? Does targeted advertising make it more likely that people will impulsively consume, right? That is, will consume and then regret their consumption because they were sold things which they, under more under more traditional marketing circumstances, they wouldn't have been persuaded to buy. And that's a question I'm happy to talk about because I, among other things, run a behavioral economics lab where we study impulsive consumption. So we bring people in and we put them through consumption experiments where they actually pay money and get products. It's not hypothetical. And sometimes we put them in fMRI scanners and we look at their brains while they make purchase decisions, real purchase decisions, where they really are stuck with what they bought. And so the question about targeted advertising and impulsive consumption directs our attention to a more general relationship, which is the relationship between social dynamics in marketing and impulsive buying. Right? What is that relationship? What do we know about the relationship between social dynamics on the one hand, right? Buying things in crowd contexts, buying things where you feel like you're buying as part of a group who are being marketed to, versus being marketed to as an atom, right? Being marketed to where you feel like it's just you facing the marketing agency alone. Do we know anything about the relationship between that and impulsive consumption? We do, yeah, and it's kind of complicated. To boil it down, the main protection, on the one hand, the main protection against impulsive consumption is people's awareness that there are social norms around it. So, take alcohol, take getting drunk, which is a form of impulsive consumption. The main, almost in all societies in the world except a few which suppress it rigorously, in almost all societies in the world, lots of people get drunk, quite often. Some people get drunk far too often and destroy themselves. What is the main protection in those societies against getting drunk too much? It's strong social norms that people are aware of about when it's okay to get drunk. Right? So in societies where there are clear social norms, like everybody gets really drunk at weddings or everybody gets drunk on Friday night, that tends to, people do their heavy drinking in the socially channeled spaces, and they tend to drink less outside those spaces because there's a clear governance norm and they just get attracted to it. So on the one hand, right, being aware that you're consuming in a group and you're consuming as part of a larger thing makes you less impulsive. Right? It's one of the ways you control impulsivity. On the other hand, right, the biggest vulnerability to impulsive consumption is copying other people. If I want to sell you all a bad stock, right, and it's a bad stock, and if you were going to think about it, you would see that it was a bad stock. I could do it two ways. I could stand up here in front of the whole room, and I could try and promote this bad stock. And if I had a couple of shills out there, and I get you to show some enthusiasm for the bad stock, I'm likely to be able to sell it to most of you. Your defenses will go down when you see other people buying it. If I have to try and persuade each of you one at a time to sell the bad stock, I will sell fewer of them. Because you're going to feel alone. You know that you're being targeted directly. You know this is a target aimed strictly at you. Your risk aversion will come up. Right? You will be wary. Your wariness will drop if you know that if you're copying other people, you see lots of other people doing something stupid, it must not be so stupid after all. Right? So the relationship is pretty complicated. On balance, though, right? On balance, a huge proportion of consumer bandwagon behavior that leads to things like over-indebtedness on credit cards and household savings rates that aren't high enough to sustain the national economy well, that whole cluster of phenomena that is all caused by impulsive purchasing, right? Most of the dynamics that seem most important to that are group dynamics. They're group dynamics. They result from lemming-type behavior. So my expectation is, and there hasn't been a lot of good social science research on this or economic research, but my prediction is that if you were each facing the market, the consumer marketers alone, if to the extent that marketing became siloed and focused, we would see less impulsive consumption, not more. Thanks.
We thank Don for his speech, and now call upon Casper to close the first round of this debate.
Thank you very much. I hope my argument still makes sense, even without the tasty water of Boris. So I jotted down a little journey, and I'm excited to take you on that. The question is marketing technology really, or is marketing technology really better for the consumer market? That's what I wrote down. If you look at the consumer, I'm taking the perspective of a marketeer, and I would say, yes, of course, it's a powerful weapon. But if you look at the human being and at the society, you put it in there, I think there's a question mark. Now you can say, okay, it makes marketing more efficient, right? So that's the point that Dave raised. Basically, I spend less time trying to find products that are actually being shown to me, so I have more time, and that's quality of life. I think that's the whole idea because behind Sergey's bringing Google glasses, right? He says information should come up before you even want it. But I don't know, I'm not truly buying into that. I think it makes marketing more effective, and that will also lead to more consumption. And then the question is that better? And to elaborate on that, I would like to just play a little mind game. So if you have three entities, one of them is business, and I say specifically material goods. And I would like to take IKEA as a representative of that. Does anybody here not know IKEA or IKEA, the furniture store, the big one? Nobody. Okay, so I don't need to elaborate. They have quite a green image. And of course, their goal is to sell more, right? So they have an interest in consumption, maybe consumerism, and obsolescence. You got the human beings, and their goals are basically being happy. That's just an assumption that I make. And you got the environment, and the goal is basically to survive, and maybe ask for a bit less consumption. Now the question is, do these goals align? And I'm not going to go into the whole environmental and business and the environmental and human thing, but I want to focus on the human and the business side. Are they overlapping? Basically, does consumption make us more happy? And that's an old question, right? But I think that's the main role of marketing. I think if I'm working as a marketeer in a FMCG company, I want to convince the consumer that consumption makes him more happy. So I would say it's the truth. I'm not like bashing on marketing. I would say marketing represents, of course, these kind of businesses. I'm here to satisfy a want or a need that's there by the consumer, and I'm just satisfying that. They see it as a mirror of society, and they often say consumer behavior is a given. Actually, that's what we learn in our lectures quite often. And here I want to open a quick bracket. I'm from Switzerland. About 6 years ago, we had a vote if you should ban all minarets in Switzerland. It was a vote upon a law, and to the surprise to Switzerland and the whole world, the majority of Swiss voted in favor of that. So the party pushing that amendment said, look, the Swiss people were afraid, we have to listen to them. They were concerned about Islamism or radical Islam moving into Switzerland. That's one thing I don't buy. I think what they did is the following. You know that every human being has a certain amount of fear of what they don't know, a certain amount of fear of foreign. Now, what that party did, and they did it extremely efficiently using marketing tools, they harvested that fear and fueled that fear on a very, very efficient level. And they changed that kind of perception. Coming back to IKEA, they expanded to the US. When they arrived, they realized the US consumer, surprisingly, is basically holding on to the piece of furniture until it breaks down. They have almost a lifelong relationship to the piece of furniture. Now, with a very successful marketing campaign, they actually convinced the US consumer to stop that behavior and start buying a lot more and throwing it away a lot more, because that's the model that IKEA is based on. Like, their furniture is not famous for being there for 10 years. So they did change consumer behavior, a European company in the US, which I think was extremely remarkable. And I think it proves that these businesses, they can create needs that are not there before. And that was in the old days. Okay, hurry up. By now, our understanding, thanks to researchers, of consumers is so much better. I would argue even that many marketeers know you better than you yourself, or me and me myself. Like, many motivations behind my decisions are hidden. And that leads to extreme targeting, and they're targeting weak groups. For example, kids. I don't know, Simon posted a documentary called Merchants of Cool, and it shows how the US teens are targeted by marketeers. And every conscious person must say that's something not right there. It can't be. I saw, Professor Ross, that you're also quite involved with gambling. And also there, I just see this, I'm not involved with gambling. Your research. I also think there needs to be some kind of protection from marketeers around. So, to conclude, they can be very, very effective and very strong in making you join that rat race that also destroys our planet, by the way. So, I don't think, no, it's not better for the consumer. This whole targeted marketing gives the marketer another very powerful weapon, and I don't think that's a good development. Although I do realize that not all goods are material consumer goods, FMCGs, that we have startups with extremely good and beneficial goods. But what's driving our society, perception, status, all these things are extremely influenced by these kind of marketeers. Thanks.
Right, so I'm just going to address each one of you in order that you spoke now and just ask you some specific questions. So, Dave, you spoke a lot about, for example, cookies, and that it would be quite a hassle that if Facebook never learned what your preferences were, or that if you had to log in every time, and that'll lead to you using those social media devices or the internet to a lesser degree. I think the first question we've got to ask is that actually a bad thing? And are these, for example, cookies not just entrapment devices to keep you on those social media pages? But secondly, you said that you have a preference for these cookies because you value your time to a certain degree. What about people who don't necessarily value their time as significantly, but rather have more of a preference for privacy? And I think you have a personal choice that you would like online media companies to use these cookies. What about people who don't have that choice and want to say no?
Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's a great question. So the whole point with social media is that you personalize your whole experience of that. So just to put this into perspective, in the old world, we had one size fits all media and marketing. One product for everyone, and everyone got the same thing. And the benefit of that was that whether you wanted to see it or not, you had your medicine, which was the news that everyone was expected to read. And that is what David mentioned on the other side, where he said the problem is that social media exposes us to only what we want to see. And I suppose this is a syndrome of someone who values their time, but I prefer not to friend everyone in the world on Facebook and to follow everyone in the world on Twitter, because there's certain people that are just far too banal for my interests, personally. So as someone that values my time, I'm very picky about who I allow into my network. And the more picky I am, the more personalized that data becomes. And that by that data, it could be anything, that's personalized. If someone's birthday is tomorrow, if there is someone that's special to me, that's news. That's someone I want to know. So that personalized experience leads to a more relevant experience. And that leads to a higher quality of informational experience for me. It's not to say that I can't pick up a magazine and get the broad-based media, but having this option to go into a personalized environment is obviously highly compelling. I don't need to tell anyone about that. And besides, every person that I choose to bring into my network brings their own diverse set of influences, which oftentimes surprises me and delights me serendipitously by what they've discovered. So, I think that's... sorry, does that answer your question? Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to leave it at that.
So I think following on quite nicely, David, what happens, I think, as follows here is that if you do use social media, you can sort of identify preferences and people you're interested in and give a fairly good idea of to the internet of what your preferences actually are. So, I mean, the question I want to ask you here is, what happens if Google knows your preferences better than you do? Can't that add to your exposure that you get from the internet? And is your argument not necessarily saying that Google should shift from backward-focused advertising to forward-thinking advertising?
Well, I think if they could shift towards forward-thinking advertising, then I would certainly like that. But I don't think you can, right? I think at a point in time, especially when someone's in the process of developing their preferences and interests, so in particular younger users of social media, which it's changing, but a large portion of social media users are quite young, in early 20s, up to mid-30s, teenagers even. They don't have a very developed idea of what interests them at that point in time. The problem is that where you have filtering to such an extent that the majority of the adverts that you're targeted with are ones that are very specifically tailored to the information that you have available, it means that you're not exposed to a broad range of things, which means that you don't have the chance to engage in that process of actually deciding for yourself what your preferences are going to be. I don't think an algorithm can predict for a person based on very basic information what their future preferences are going to be and things they might find interesting. I think people are a bit too diverse for that to be viable.
Okay, thank you. Turning to Don, so we heard quite a lot about some of the interesting studies that you've done. A question for me that I would ask, though, is what happens if the sort of societal pressure and group dynamics that you were talking about are formed prior to people using the internet? Or if social media, in a sense, helps create those social pressures and group dynamics that force upon sort of impulsive consumerism. Surely then, regardless, because if the adverts themselves aren't forming these pressures or group dynamics, but rather they're formed beforehand, surely then advertising online is still going to be just as effective and just as harmful as opposition would like you to believe.
Right. So we know that preferences are not formed before marketing. The relationship between preferences and marketing is dynamic. Certainly marketing has something to do with changing and shaping preferences. And thank goodness that it does, right? Marketing is as an economist, I think of marketing as a tremendously good force in society, right? I certainly don't think it's a bad thing that marketing encourages people to buy more stuff and helps them be more be better informed and more aware and more alert and more interested in buying stuff. Take a little parable. If some marketing genius convinced you all that you just must have an electric cat polisher, right? Terrific, right? Especially if it creates a robust electric cat polisher industry, right? And a new place for investment to go. It's very, that the whole essence of our economic life, right, is the opening up of new opportunities for satisfying new wants, indeed bringing new wants into existence and stimulating more economic activity. Why is that so important? Why is it so important that we have that? Well, here's why. You would not want to live in a society where the government couldn't borrow. I promise you, right? If our government couldn't borrow tomorrow, that would be a horrible, horrible thing to happen to us. But no democratic government in history has ever paid down its debt. It's impossible politically. No government in history has ever paid down its debt. They can't do it. How do they get out of their debt? They grow out of it. What grows them out of it? Basically consumption. It's true that as a society we're addicted to growth. But we're addicted to growth for a very, very good reason. We're addicted to growth because we're also addicted to social welfare programs, and growth and consumption is the only way we've ever paid for them. So I like to see more effective marketing. Marketers are only doing targeted marketing because they think it's more effective. I believe that it is. Go for it.
Right. Well, turning to Casper now, I think maybe you can address what Donna said in sort of your closing speech that you're going to give a little later, but I'd like to ask you a different question about online marketing. If you argue now that there's a need for companies like IKEA to create demand in order for them to sell their products, surely if we're able to use online advertising that as has been argued, is more able to target specific consumers and identify their preferences, surely then if you're using online marketing, you have less of a need to create new demands to sell your products, but it's actually just easier to sell your products in general because you're able to target consumers who probably do want them in the first place.
I wouldn't agree that. I mean, the goal of companies in general is profit maximization, right? So even though if you can target better, you still go as far as you can. And you can, I think, so you have less spread. Of course, online marketing allows for that better targeting by definition, but it's also going to be more intense. And I think what we, or I sometimes tend to forget, I think all of us in here, we're basically the best protected people from this kind of wants and needs that marketing or business is trying to impose on us. We are well educated and we're conscious about that. Now, parents who buy furniture might be not as conscious, but then you have other groups like teens who are extremely insecure, and if they're targeted that directly, I think we have a problem as a society.
Okay, cool. At this point, I'm just looking at the time, and I want to allow enough time for the floor to ask questions. I'm going to allow one speaker from the proposition team to direct a question at the opposition team. I don't know.
You go ahead.
Okay. All right. Just a question. Hey, you can't make a point.
You can do that later.
No, that's cool. Sheesh.
So I do it.
Yeah.
So, do you guys actually think it would be better if people bought in general less stuff?
I think if you bought less stuff, but you had a wider range of stuff that you were exposed to and able to choose from, then I think for the individual, it might be better. It really depends on the precise quantities. So I'm not sure if targeted marketing is definitely effective for the businesses that use it, but I'm not sure how that affects your aggregate demand.
I would absolutely agree. Yes, to this statement.
It would be better if people bought less stuff.
Yeah, I think by now there's a lot of research showing the relationship between material stuff and happiness. And if that's the goal, and that's the assumption for me, getting happier, joining that rat race won't make you more happy. The story of stuff, it's a YouTube video. It says like consumerism, material wealth, and happiness are not related at all. That's the source I give you. I can't prove that, but they actually say it's a negative correlation. I think we've been focusing on material wealth, GDP measures for societies for way too long. We have to change that paradigm.
Sure. And you guys now have an opportunity to direct a question to the prop team.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it looks.
Sorry, I can ask one, I guess.
Go for it, yeah.
Professor Ross, I'm curious about the point you made about how impulsive consumption is affected by targeted advertising. So, my intuition with regards to people who use the internet is that they feel as though that is quite an individual place, and that they would feel as though all ads that target them on the internet are ones that target them as individuals as opposed to groups. So do you really see targeted advertising changing the extent to which people believe they're targeted as an individual as opposed to being targeted as a group?
Right. So I agree with the presupposition of your question. People do feel more like individuals. They do feel like they're dealing with the world on an individual basis on the web to a greater extent than if they're watching a television ad in the Super Bowl and they know that that ad is being watched by 40 million other people at the same time. But that's my point. The evidence is that people are most likely to consume impulsively when they feel like they're part of a mass operation, because the ad on the Super Bowl is telling you that this is something that millions of other people must also want to consume. So it must be okay, right? You can suspend your doubt. You don't needn't be risk averse in the way that you tend to be if you feel like you're dealing in a one-on-one bargaining situation. So I'm offering reasons to think that to the extent that people feel like they're being targeted in a silo, they feel alone when they're on the web, they are less likely to make impulsive purchases.
Right. Okay, at this point, we're going to open it up to the floor, so you can direct questions at either specific panelists or at one of the teams. So if you just have a question, just put up your hand, and we can try. We've got about sort of 12 minutes of time left before we need to move on to closing statements. So let's try to take about 4 or 5 questions. Okay, well, let's go here and then work left.
When you asked Casper if buying more stuff is bad or good, and you disagreed with him quite extensively, can you just, because all we got was a no from you, can you tell us why?
Well, I mean, I already said something about this, right? Which is that, for better or worse, all of the structures of modern economies are built around extensive economic interaction, right? The marketplace is one of the core institutions, one of the most vibrant and thriving institutions. It's the basis for almost all of the wealth and comfort we enjoy. And no one has any concept of how we would have a market society in which we did not have general growth and consumption. There's no theory, there's no viable theory anybody's ever proposed as to how that would work, that any economist would recognize.
May I just say something on that as well? I just want to say, like, it's also not all stuff is stuff. Because if I think about the last kind of 5 things that I bought, it was like an online course, a trip, to take myself up country to like unplug for a couple of days. I bought an accounting package for my business that I think is going to save me money versus my current one. So I'm buying stuff based on personalized targeting. It's actually saving resources. And in fact, most of the stuff that I'm buying actually reduces my dependency on like kind of the old world industrial kind of economic complex. And that's all driven by personalized advertising and targeting. So I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. More kind of stuff or more kind of targeting. I think that that's a false dichotomy.
I'm happy to consider courses and trips stuff. Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Whatever you like.
So the economy can do well and personalization.
There's another question at the back. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. Question for Dave. You mentioned cookies earlier on, and my view is that they can be used for good or for evil. So I'll give you an example of how they can be used.
Cookie monster.
Exactly. I've been told if you visited travel websites for plane tickets again and again, and it registers that interest recurringly, the price gets hiked up.
Yeah, to like kind of encourage desperation. It's true. It's true. It works. Yeah.
Likewise, I suppose similar concept. If you visited on a MacBook Air, presumably you're a more affluent consumer than if you visited on a HP laptop. So now, isn't that a bad thing for consumers? I get how it's a good thing for the companies. Revenue maximization, but it's not a bad thing for consumers.
Great. Well, it comes down to the issue of whether price discrimination at all is a good thing. And basically, long story short, I believe it absolutely is. The fool and his money should be parted as soon as bloody possible. So, no, but basically, I mean, people pay whatever they consider a fair price to pay. And to be honest, the poor starving HP users shouldn't be deprived of the great holidays, just because they can't afford it. And, the kind of spoiled Mac users should, I mean, I'm obviously being over the top here, but basically the thing is that you offset people have got a little bit more to spend. It's kind of, recently Patrice Motsepe gave half of his wealth to charity, which is more money than I will ever earn in the next 50 lifetimes on this planet. And the reason why is 50% of his wealth, because he's such a billionaire, actually hurts less than me giving away 50% of my wealth. Because he's got those means. So I think that price discrimination actually is a good thing. And if people are that price sensitive, they can actually go elsewhere. So long story short, it might not be necessarily better for the individual, but I would say it's better for society.
Economists have a word for it. We call it efficiency.
Yeah.
We had a question in front of him.
Cool. Yeah. Also towards Dave and Don. It's around it's also around cookies and things, but the actual ethical nature of them. Because the whole concept is that cookies and sort of marketing, data mining techniques and stuff are placed on my computer. It's my property, and I think a lot of people they see it as an invasion of their personal privacy. For instance, if my neighbor starts throwing thorns onto my lawn, one or two is not going to be an issue, but after about 50, to 100 pieces of thorns, like eventually I'm going to start noticing them, understand that they're going to hurt. And bringing that back to digital, for one, a negative aspect could be that my data is sold off to other sort of marketing companies that are less responsible, and then I end up getting stuff that I don't necessarily want anyway, and then the whole sort of targeted marketing things is out of the equation. So just around the ethical nature of
correct, yeah,
placing cookies and stuff on your private property.
Yeah, I'll just say first of all, I think cookies aren't actually thorns. They're basically for one thing, they help you save data by caching versions of the web pages and storing your data, saving you time. Secondly, all right, geez, there was like an amazing point that I was going to make that was going to blow your mind. I'm going to let Don talk, and I'm just going to reflect on what that point was, and then I'll get back to you.
I suspect, like most people, I have sometimes found myself thinking, should I, for example, if I actually discovered that somebody is sending me a bunch of crap because as a result of some cookie, I sometimes think to myself, should I turn all my cookies off to wipe that out, right? And then turn them back on again and start over. And I'm weighing the pros and cons, right? I'm saying, well, as Dave was saying, there's lots of reasons for convenience why I don't want to turn off my cookies, to take all my cookies down, right? But I would like to shut off this annoyance. So I weigh it, and I weigh the margins of, and from time to time the annoyance gets too big, and I set it back to 0. Isn't that just like the kind of pro and con weighing, marginal cost-benefit analysis we're all doing all the time with respect to everything, right? I mean, it's like, do you like doing most of your transport in your own car? Well, there's downsides to it, right? You pay for petrol and you sit in traffic jams, and there's upsides to it. You get to go exactly where you want, exactly when you want. Listen to your own music, and so when we weigh and make those decisions. It's part of freedom. I don't see how this is any different or any more fundamental a challenge to privacy or freedom than almost everything else in our social life.
If I can say something.
No, I remember my mind-blowing point, but it's cool. We'll keep everyone waiting.
Don't forget it. I think there is a major difference. There's a huge information gap, an awareness and information gap, and that's a huge difference in these two situations that you described.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You don't lose a debate by agreeing with the other side. That's cool. We'll talk about that in debating society. No, basically, the point that I remembered was something that I heard in a talk by someone at Google. He said, we would never sell your data because we'd go out of business. He said, your data is our greatest asset. If we sold your data, we'd give all of our competitors give away our competitive advantage, and we'd give to the people who are our customers no reason to keep coming back to us. So what Google and Facebook and other companies that have your data do is that they use your data, and they've got to protect it with everything that a $3 trillion company can throw at protecting that data, because that's all that they have, in order to give you more personalized targeting and messaging. And that point blew my mind about cookies. I was like, okay, actually it's in their very best interest to protect my information. They would never sell it, but they do use it to give me a better experience of their products.
Cool.
Are your minds blown?
I think we had, Simon, there was a question to the right of you as well. You can ask?
No, I'm okay.
You're okay. Okay, let's go to Simon, and then we've got about 4 more minutes, so make it quick.
I just wanted to, again, sorry, Dave and Don. So, Don, you were saying, so first of all, like impulsive buying, I mean, it's easier to get someone to just make a commitment quickly because it's minimal commitment to buy impulsively. So for companies that are looking for growth and sales, like it's easier if you're looking for short-term gains to try and get someone to buy impulsively. So then if we look at like the sort of targeting thing, you mentioned 2 ways that people would sort of more likely to buy impulsively. So number 1 is when they feel like there's a social presence, and number 2 is when they don't feel like it's sales. And so like Dave works on people like not making bad online marketing for one, so not making it look like sales, look like marketing, which brings down that perception of you being individually targeted. And then also they're really good at making you feel as if all your friends have bought it because they put social plugins and make marketplaces on Facebook. So like all of a sudden then you create a system where online marketers are creating these opportunities for impulsive buying. And so I just want to put that to you because it's sort of like marketers can use tools to get people to buy impulsively pretty easily. Seemingly.
That's a good point.
And is that not bad?
Right, but the question wasn't will there be no impulsive buying as a result of targeted marketing, right? The question was, will targeted marketing make a larger or smaller proportion of the consumption that goes on impulsive? There are lots of studies that suggest that the main reason why companies pay so much more to advertise on certain sporting events or certain events which are major media events. They pay way more than would just be predicted by a linear extrapolation of the number of people who are going to see the ad, right? And the reason is because a very big part of the basis of that kind of advertising campaign is the fact that you know when you're seeing that ad that everybody else in society is seeing it too, right? You're participating in a group event when you see this mass ad. So my point was just that targeted marketing, right, is the opposite kind of marketing from that. I wasn't, of course, claiming there's no way in which somebody selling targeted ads could try to give you the impression that you're participating and therefore, or try to encourage compulsive purchases. Look, whether a company wants to encourage impulsive purchases depends on what it's selling. If I'm selling pizza, I certainly want to encourage impulsive purchases, right? Whoever bought a pizza, except unless you're supplying your kid's 4th birthday party, right? All your pizza purchases are impulsive. So of course, some companies are going to, and when they can create odors from the on the internet, you can bet that the pizza ads will smell nice.
Cool. Final question.
My question goes to the other side, specifically David. You spoke about wanting more information to be able to better understand your interests and your interest to grow. And it's a very basic question on consumer behavior. And you're in a situation where we are constantly bombarded with multiple stimuli, the internet even more so, and with very limited attention and actually selective perception, we are on a conscious level and on a subconscious level actually filtering out that information. So don't you think while we may believe that we want to look after our privacy, we are also in fact asking marketers to do that targeting for us, to save us time and filtering out that information we're not looking for.
So I'm definitely okay with individuals filtering their own information. I think that's great. The point is that it's important that there's still something there so that there might be that one piece of marketing that you don't filter out that wouldn't be there if an algorithm was doing that filtering for you. So that one thing that might stand out, that was something you'd never thought of, is what ends up being lost. And I agree that it's not a massive number of cases where this happens, but it's those 1 or 2 black swan events where you do see something that would have been filtered by the algorithm that I think really matter. And the fact that you are filtering a lot of that yourself is exactly why I don't think this idea of things consuming your time to a large extent really apply. I don't think those banners that appear on my web browser consume that much time of mine.
Okay, we're going to end questions there, and we're going to turn again to the same speaking order just to give sort of closing statements, 3 minutes each. Yeah, cool. Take it away.
Okay, excellent. All right. I felt sometimes that we were arguing like, you guys were arguing for like more random advertising to be targeted at us, and like I'm not sure I want more random like kind of stuff targeted at me, but I'm not going to use that as the basis for my closing argument. What I'm rather going to do is just look at it from a perspective I don't think that we've considered tonight, and that's to say that we've got this amazing explosion of small businesses that are emerging, and maybe some of you guys want to do your own business one day. And as a result of these incredible databases that we have available to us online, whether it be on Pinterest, people have put their hands up and said we're interested in certain things, or on Facebook. Twitter's allowing small businesses to target ads based on what they talk about on a regular basis. Google helps us target ads based on what people are searching for and what sites they visited. With all of this, someone with a really small budget, as low as 100 Rand, can suddenly reach just the people that they want to, instead of spending that money on previously. I remember when I started my first business, I had like 5,000 Rand to spend on advertising, and I had to buy bloody paper brochures and pay someone to go and stick them on cars. And maybe out of those thousands of brochures that were sent out, maybe 1% of the people that saw them were the people that I was interested in getting to come and give me business. Now, as a small business, these days, I can reach just the people that I want to reach, which means I save the time of the 99%, and I save 99% of the money that I would have spent, which means that me as a small business gets to stay in business another day and fight another day. And I think that that's going to lead to many more interesting new small businesses emerging. It means that we won't be in a one-size-fits-all big brand or go-home kind of world. And I think that that's going to lead to a better South Africa and a better future for all of us who want our own small businesses in the future.
Cool, thank you very much. David?
So I think there are a number of concerns that came up in this debate. The first one, to look at how the consumer's affected. I think really what we get is a case in which you're locked down to specific preferences. I think, yes, chances are you'll probably use the adverts that you're exposed to a bit more than you otherwise would. And I'm happy to accept that with more random advertising, you use them less often. I don't think there's a massive time concern, because individuals do filter the information they're exposed to on their own. And I think they do use that, their own filter, in order to pick out what they do and don't want. The problem is I don't want a situation in which those small businesses need to just target a select group of people. I would much rather have a situation in which those small businesses did their best to target everyone, so that everyone could have access to those ideas and those products that exist on the market. Equally, I would rather the big businesses targeted everyone, as opposed to specific income groups, specific racial groups, and specific people who've already admitted to having a particular interest. Secondly, I think the privacy issue and the issue of cookies in general is really a problem of consent. The issue that I see is that people don't understand how these things work, and they don't necessarily consent to that information being available to businesses. The other problem is that you can't just pick and choose very easily which cookies you want to have on your computer. You can't say, I don't like this website, which uses cookies to spam me, but I do like these other ones. So that's a problem, and there's a problem with a lack of information and a lack of consent in that regard. With regards to impulsiveness, I think there's a tension to say that you don't like impulsive consumption, but that you do like more consumption to happen. Presumably, if you want to increase aggregate consumption in order to create growth, then you have to be happy with impulsive consumption as well, although maybe there's a response to that coming up. So I think in that regard, if we're really going to be concerned with the consumer, I think we presumably don't want as much impulsive consumption, but I think that what's likely to happen is it's not likely to be particularly different, right? I think people will perceive themselves as being individual on the internet, whether it's targeted advertising or not. And the reason for that is I think there's a large information asymmetry. So people think the internet is their personal space. That's why you see putting dangerous personal information that might be held against them by businesses people put that stuff online all the time. There's information asymmetry about how this targeting works, and that's why I don't think people feel as though they stand as individuals to any greater extent. So, for those many reasons, I think these targeted ads are a thing that I would regret, and I'd prefer to have so-called more random advertising so that I could be exposed to a wider range of new ideas.
Thanks, David. Don?
So sometimes people think of markets, and there's some frames of discussion, they think of markets in the following terms. There's a bunch of vulnerable buyers out there with tiny piles of resources and predatory businesses trying to take those resources away from them. Because that happens sometimes. But that's not surely the overriding image of the market. The overriding point and frame for thinking about markets is the market is the basis of almost all of our social life and the development of culture. On targeted marketing, from between 1978 and 1986, before I became an academic, I was a professional rock musician. And the biggest thing we struggled against was the fact that marketing of popular music was not very well targeted. In order to be able to get time in a studio, you had to be able to persuade a record company that you could sell a minimum number of records. The problem with being able to sell that minimum number of records is because the access that record stores and record stores and companies had to who was buying in which local markets, they couldn't afford to stock less than a very large proportion of records. They had to order basically in bulk, and then they had to be able to move 60% of that bulk copy they ordered. So the total number of bands who could be supported, who could get time in recording studios, was very, very pinched. You had to reach a huge record-selling target before you could actually get anybody to give you studio time. During the time I was in music, we watched that steadily fall. Right? We watched more and more bands get access to recording studio time. Why? Why was that happening? It was happening because new technology was coming online that was allowing the record companies to do better and closer targeting of small market slices, so that instead of having to sell 50 copies of the new horrible Boston album, right, a record store could order 3 copies of the new Replacements album, right, and sell as long, because they were only going to sell 3 in that market, but that was enough to get the Replacements into the recording. That is the basic story of marketing. Now, that wasn't targeted marketing as we now know it on the internet and with cookies, but it's exactly the same logic. The more efficient the marketing, the greater dynamism in your market. The greater dynamism in your market, that is the key to dynamism in society. And if you like a dynamic society, you should like dynamic, efficient markets, and this serves targeted marketing serves that.
Thank you. Finally, Casper, to close this discussion.
Thank you very much. I do not question the benefits that the other side has laid out, especially not the democratization of the marketplace. However, I think these benefits are outweighed by the drawbacks that are made. I agree with Professor Ross. There's been no system so far that would replace a consumption-based economy, and it might just be like democracy, the best of all the bad systems. However, I think like both systems, they can fall into extremes. There has to be a certain balance also in our consumption-based economy. This new tool of social media might move the point where we are to one of these extremes. I don't know how to change it, but is it really better? I don't think so.
Cool. I think at this point we're going to turn to the audience, and I realize you all are probably marketing students, are quite biased to one side rather than the other. But if we can get a show of hands who thinks the proposition side won. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, I'm just going to guess as far as it looks like the majority of you, but let's just see. So who's going for the opposition side? I was actually relatively close, but I think proposition just scraped through and won that one. So well done to you guys. And yeah, thank you for a really, really good discussion. I don't know what's going to happen afterwards, but we can ask him.